right, guys, this is another episode of Subtle Asian Voices, and I'm your host, Norman. And if you haven't done it already, make sure you subscribe down there. And today, I have a really special guest for me here today, my friend here, Ale. And he's gonna tell us a little bit about himself and what he does. All right.
So, okay, hi everyone. I'm Alejandro. I'm a humanitarian worker. I've been doing humanitarian work for the last 8 years or so. But actually, by education, I'm a landscape architect. But I started doing humanitarian work because I did Peace Corps, and kind of, it's a passion that grew within me to continue to help people in need. And I've just kind of been doing that. And I also like, being exposed to different countries and cultures. So it's something that drives me, and it's kind of who I am now.
Right. And that's awesome. But so let's start from the beginning, right? So you started Peace Corps. Like how did you end up in Peace Corps? Like what was the mindset, from going from landscape architecture into Peace Corps, and then onto what you currently do now in humanitarian aid?
Oh man, that's so. Yeah, to how I ended up doing Peace Corps is not kind of. So most people that do Peace Corps, they end up doing it right out of school because they've been wanting to do that, or they do it end of career, like retirement age, because it's something that they've wanted to do. For me, it was a bit more unorthodox, I think, because actually, like when I was ending my studies at UF, it was the worst of the economy, and Peace Corps was something that came up and was suggested by my professors even. And actually, at the time when it was mentioned to me by my professors, it was something that I was not really interested. I was like, why the hell would I go to country X and work for no money? Like, that doesn't make any sense. But then, I graduated from school, and it was the worst of the economy. It was tough to find a job, and I was kind of scrambling around to get experience. And to stay afloat, I started doing valet parking and other stuff, like anything that came up to kind of pay my bills. I would do anything. And basically, I ended up offering to work for free for a few landscape architecture firms, and some of them got back to me, and I started working with this guy called his name is Jimmy Sokash, and he has a firm. At the time, it was a solo firm because it was the worst of the economy, so he was doing a few jobs here and there, and he kind of took me under his wing because he wanted to develop me. So he did Peace Corps, and while I was working with him, he would talk about his experience in Peace Corps Costa Rica on a daily basis, and it sounded like a very different experience than what I imagined. And it was something that I could resonate to, because I had done backpacking in Europe, and I kind of was craving to have that kind of adventure where I was on my own in a different country, figuring things out. And the plus side of Peace Corps is that you do something also to help people. So I don't know, his experience kind of resonated to me, and he had an influence on me. And then, while working with him, it influenced me to apply. It took me a while to get in because I had my college debt that I had to clear, and it took me 2 years. But I don't know, he was the big influence to get me to join Peace Corps. He didn't know it directly, but as he was talking about it, it just made me interested. And he's an older guy, so he was kind of the first batch of Peace Corps after JFK, did his
Right.
speech, and he said like, you know, it's not what you can do for your country. It's not what you can do for your country, but what, I don't know. I'm saying it
No,
wrong,
it's
but
not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country.
yeah, yeah. So he joined after that. He's like kind of like the hippie trail Peace Corps.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know. It made me really interested in it. So it was, I don't know. It's
No,
something
that's
that
cool.
resonated with me.
That's cool. You get to do, like best of both worlds. Get to see, different parts of the world, and you get to do some good in the world as well too. And get some experience as well too, probably. But and in terms of like Peace Corps, right? Like were you able to pick where you wanted to go, or they assign you where you wanted to go?
Oh man, that's like, yeah. So, so for me, like, I was kind of naive when I went into it, and I applied to go to like Central South America,
Hmm.
and then because it was a long process, you know, like the application process is long. It's quite selective. So, or at the time, now it's different. Now you can apply to a specific country, but when I applied, you could apply to the program, and you at the time you could select a preference, and then they kind of get back to you. So I selected like Central South America, and then initially I was selected, I think, to go to like Honduras or something like that. But then in
Hmm.
Honduras, um, there was an outbreak of violence, so they couldn't send volunteers anymore.
Hmm.
And basically, they got back to me and they told me to wait, and that they were going to offer me something else.
Okay.
And then they came back and they offered me Nepal, which is a country that I never even thought of going. Actually, all I knew about Nepal was Mount Everest, to be honest. Like, I didn't know anything about it when they offered it to
Hmm.
me. I was kind of like, I was like, I'm not so sure that I want to do this actually. And
Right.
then, you know, like I went back to the office, and I spoke to Jimmy, which is the guy that I mentioned that had done Peace Corps before and kind of
Hmm.
influenced me indirectly. Not that he was like, you need to do Peace Corps. No, it was kind of more like his experience,
Hmm.
and him talking about his experience influenced me. But basically, I went back and I was like, dude, like they offered me Nepal. Like, I'm not so sure. He's like, dude, don't even think about it. Just fucking go. Just go.
Hmm.
It's gonna change your life. And I was kind of like, fuck, I'm not so sure what I'm getting into. But you know, at the time, I was also doing like, okay, you know, I studied landscape architecture, but at the time I was doing like construction management, and I was
Hmm.
kind of like fed up with my job, and I wanted to do something different. I also wanted, you know, to have like, I had a craving to, I don't know, to see more outside of like what's normal to me.
Hmm.
So like him saying that kind of gave me the reassurance to kind of be like, you know what, fuck it, I'm just gonna go to Nepal. I'm just gonna do it,
Right.
and I did. I jumped on it.
Right. And how was the experience in Nepal? Like you need nothing. Like so what was the first, like when you first landed in Nepal? What was your reaction to that first, landing?
Oh man. so so when I first got to Nepal, like, I mean, it was, in a way, it was kind of a, I remember like I landed and I was heading to the hotel. Not really, it's not a hotel. It's kind of like a shitty guest house that Peace Corps put us in.
Mm.
And it was kind of like a breath of fresh air, because it was kind of like an environment that I'm more comfortable in than the US. Because it was like, you know, there's something when I arrived about the smell of like burning petrol, and this,
Mm.
you know, the street is chaos and all that, that I could like really identify with because of,
Hmm.
I don't know, my experience backpacking, as well as like my upbringing like Puerto Rico. So it's something that I felt, and I was like, actually, this feels good. And but then things got really different all of a sudden, because like,
Mm.
you know, I went from like, I'm going to the office every day, sitting in front of a computer, going to construction sites to do management. to all of a sudden I'm in this mud house eating with my hands. I cannot fucking talk to my host family, and like I'm figuring things out and learning the language at the same time. So I got like, it was just kind of like a big shock. And I had a moment that while I was in Nepal when I first arrived, that I'm sitting in this mud house in the kitchen with my family, my host family. They're cooking in an open stove. It's like wood fire stove. They're cooking the food. They serve it to me. I'm eating with my hands. I don't know how to eat with my hands. It's the first time I'm doing it. Actually, it takes a bit of practice. It's not like, eating rice and vegetables and whatever with your hands. It takes technique. So I was eating and spilling the food all over me, and I was like, what in the fuck am I, what the fuck did I do? What the fuck am I doing here,
Right.
So it's kind of like a big shock, but at the same time, it was scary, but at the same time, I kind of took it like a challenge upon myself to, really understand things and kind of like, okay, this is much different than the way I live. So let me experience this and try to learn from it.
Right. And that's a great, experience, and being able to be open-minded enough to, eat your hands and be in a completely different, society that you're used to. And I think that's takes a lot of, courage, right? And maybe more people should do that, right? Maybe go out of their comfort zone and try it out, right? Maybe they'll learn something.
I don't know. I think it's different in that sense, it's different for everyone because like for me, the way I reacted to it, and I had some exposure before, of course, I had done backpacking on my own, and I was kind of comfortable being in those uncomfortable situations, but that's not for everyone, and not everyone reacts to it in the same way. Like for some people, it's really uncomfortable, I was in my host family, these people's house, and I was respectful of that. I was willing to learn, but for some people, the reaction is like, whoa, this is like not the way I want to be fucking living. Like this shit sucks. I want to get out of here. So, everybody has a different reaction, and not everybody has that mindset that they can adapt to it. Like even in Peace Corps, like you have it's 2 years, and there's a lot of people that drop out in the first year because being in such a different situation than what you grew up in, it pushes you to your limits. Like it really challenges you as a person, challenges what in your culture, and like what you grew up with. Like for example, for me, like the first year of Peace Corps, like it was tough. I'm not gonna lie. Like a lot of people drop out in the first year because it's so tough that you're struggling learning the language, you're struggling living in such a different situation, you're struggling to do like the regular things that you do at home. Like they're just much harder, and people react differently to that. Like some people like react to that and they feel like, okay, this is not for me. I'd rather be in my comfort zone. Some people are like me, and they're more like, okay, I can figure this out, and I also want to learn from this. And there's also an in between where people are like, okay, I know I'm more comfortable being at home, but I can do this temporarily. It's different for everybody. So it's not. I don't think it's something that everybody should do. But I do think that I think being open to differences, in religion, culture, and this kind of thing, that's something that everybody can do.
Yeah.
But having this kind of experience it's a different thing. Right. I don't think it's for everyone.
It's maybe a little bit more of extreme experience, but I was talking more about like just like out in the world and just like maybe like going to a different country for vacation or something, and maybe that would be something that would be open-minded for them as experience. But in terms of like at the whole end of the process, like what did you learn about yourself and maybe about the world around you after your stint that with Peace Corps was over?
I think one of the things that like I really felt was that, like Nepali culture, of course, is very different than Puerto Rican culture or the culture in Miami that we grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, like one of the things that really stood out were like underlying like common ground. Like, in Nepal, people are predominantly Hindu or Buddhist, but the way they celebrate, the way that, they have meaningful time with family or with loved ones, in the end, it's all the same, like there's Hindu holidays that, are a week long, but are very similar to the holidays that we have, or I don't know, there's a lot of similarities in the way that we think, even though we're so different, and that's
Mm-hmm.
something that I really felt, because by the end of my time in Nepal, I really felt like it was tough at the beginning because it was not a culture that I could identify with. But by the end of Peace Corps, I really felt like it was my home, and I belonged there, and
Mm-hmm.
speaking Nepali, and I remember when I got back from Peace Corps, I was talking to my uncle one day, and he was like, "The way you're talking to me in English and Spanish is really weird." And then he saw a guy in on the news that was Nepali. He was like, "Dude, you're just speaking with a Nepali accent. I just realized I saw a guy on the news and you speak with a Nepali accent, like it just
Right.
became a part of me. And
Yeah.
it's still a part of me. I think it'll be a part of me for the rest of my life, because, like it's not only about like these underlying similarities, but also like the bonds that I made with people there
Mm-hmm.
are, I don't know, it's something that changed me for forever, because it's, they're so different than me. Their upbringing was so different than me. They're subsistence farmers. I came from, born in Puerto Rico, being raised in Miami, to, you know, this completely different life, to living as in a family that's subsistence farming, eating with my hands.
Mm-hmm.
And, at the end, it's not so different, to be honest. And they're like, I also like, one of the biggest things that I learned from it is like, because they were subsistence farmers, and, they had some form of incomes that were quite small, but, you know, it, one of the things that really stuck with me is that you can do so much more with so much less, right? What I mean is like in the US, there's this culture of like, I need to make as much money as I can. I need to do, especially in Miami, like you have these like, it's like this fucking go, go, go culture. Let me try to get as much as I can and be the most of everything. Whereas actually you don't need to do that. You can, you can have enough without having to have the most money or having the most resources. Happiness is a package that doesn't have to be that. It could be, you have enough to feed your family, you have quality time with your family. I don't know, it really changed my perspective on things. Not that my
Mm-hmm.
perspective was, I mean, part of the reason that I went into Peace Corps is because my perspective, I never really identified with like Miami culture, where it's like, fucking go, let's make as much money as we can, and like that kind of like drive. I don't know. It's not something that ever resonated with me, but I can say after Peace Corps, it changed much more. Like I can understand now, like, these people, for example, like the host family that I lived with, they were, they were. Am I still on?
Yeah, you still on?
Oh, the is back is
Wait. All right. So that was a little bit of a little hitch up there, since you being over there in I think you're in Iraq, right?
I'm in Erbil, yeah. So yeah, the
Yeah.
power went up. It goes out sometimes. There's
Yeah.
power
So
cuts.
it just happens, right? So it's all good. But I think we were talking about, your perspective changing from, living in America versus, living in Nepal. And we're just gonna continue doing that in terms of your perspective on changing.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, I kind of I'll try to pick up where I left off, but I'm not so sure. But um, yeah, basically, like I understand from seeing how people lived in Nepal, I understood that you could be happiness is not all the money that you can get, or like doing or living these extreme lifestyles that we in Miami are brought up to expect in a way. Like
Mm-hmm.
like you go to the going to having a job making the biggest salary that you can, or trying to get the biggest salary, studying to get that big salary, or
Mm-hmm.
getting as much money as you can. I feel like that's a lot of Miami, and like
It's America in
in
general, I feel like, maybe in the big cities probably.
yeah. I think it's US in general, but like you from being in Nepal, I understood that actually, if you have enough food on the table, you have your family, you have these meaningful moments. They don't have to be extravagant, but they're just as special, and like that
Mm-hmm.
that really touched me because, of course, like in Nepal, people have much less. Their lifestyle is much different, and but it was still the same. It's just
Yeah.
not the same. It was just I think it had more meaning, to be honest, because it's like they really valued time spent together, and there was like
Right.
this value of like really spending time with family, and it was really special.
Yeah. And I saw that like when I visited you in Nepal, and I completely saw what you were talking about, and I saw people who, compared to what I see in America, it was not you know much, right? It wasn't seem like people had much in the area. Like, roads were dirt, roads were, air quality wasn't too good. People, looked like they were mostly walking, but they seemed like they were happy, and I really enjoyed how their faces were not of like sadness, but it was happiness. And compared to what I see in America, where people have faces of, they're kind of angry sometimes, and it just, like when I was there, I really felt the spiritual connection there of, wow, this is not what I like. What I see here in America is not what I need as well too. Like, I don't need all that stuff either, and I think that's very important too. So that was a great experience for me. Like, that's awesome. But there's one thing I was curious about, like in terms of you learning the language, right? Like, how long did it take you to learn the language? Like, how were you able to learn the language to be able to finally be connected with the country and culture?
So that kind of that was a luxury. I mean, now that I'm doing humanitarian work, and I've been not only in Nepal but Myanmar, Bangladesh, now I'm in Iraq, etc. Like, you know, it was a luxury of Peace Corps because one, I had no option.
Mm-hmm.
I had to, like, I lived in a community on my own. People predominantly didn't know English, and if they did, they knew very little. So it's like they knew enough English, like I knew Nepali. So it kind of like I was in a situation where I had to.
Mm-hmm.
But I also, with Peace Corps, you take 3 months of of language training, and you kind of learn the basics, and you leave like I would compare it to like speaking like a baby. But then you're
Mm-hmm.
put in the situation that you have to come through and learn, because otherwise you won't be effective as a volunteer.
Mm-hmm. So
Because
basically, they teach you the basics, and then you just pick up as you go along in your community, right? Basically.
yeah, you have to figure it out, because like whatever you learn is a base that you can build from, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
everything, and it's not like, you know, it's something that happens with languages. I'll give you an example, like, you know, Spanish and English, I kind of like learn together.
Mhm.
If I'm speaking more English than Spanish, then my Spanish is compromised a bit. And then if I go to Puerto Rico, I spent a couple of weeks, my Spanish becomes better than my English.
Mhm.
So like, you know, it's weird.
It's about immersing yourself into the culture and language, right? Basically, right? And I think
Yeah,
our
you
brain
have to
just connects.
be.
I think our
Yeah,
brain
you have
just
to.
connects. You
You
know.
have to be in it to kind of. It helps to get it. I think, like, for example, like while at UF, I took Portuguese, I took French, but I can tell you, like, even though I got through those classes, I learned quite a bit. It's not anything that stuck with me because I was never in a
Mhm.
situation that I had to use it. But being in Peace Corps, like, I had to use Nepali. I had to develop it so that I could work. And
Mhm.
like going back to like the differences between the languages where one becomes dominant over the other, like, you know, right now, because I'm not speaking Nepali, my Nepali language skills have decreased. But if I go to Nepal and I practice, it'll increase. But it's the same as my Spanish and English. Like, I do humanitarian work. I speak about humanitarian work in English all the time. If I
Mhm.
go home and I try to speak about humanitarian work in Spanish, it's difficult because I just don't speak about humanitarian work in Spanish all the time. So it would take me some time to adapt and kind of like
Figure out the
grasp
vocabulary,
the
right?
vocabulary. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's like a normal thing.
Right. And yeah, I think that's very true with learning languages. You just have to be there to and constantly practice to get it correct. And that's it's awesome. It's awesome that you're able to pick it up and probably you know immerse yourself into the culture and become one, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
and it's
now,
been.
mhm.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, and it's like learning Nepali actually, like, it helped me. For example, when I was doing humanitarian work in Bangladesh, because there's some similarities. Of course, you know, Bangladesh, Hindi in India, Nepali, they all come from like Sanskrit. So,
Mhm.
you know, for example, in Bangladesh, I could understand quite a lot because of because I knew Nepali. So it was quite
Mhm.
helpful there.
That's good. And now I want to segue into once you finish Peace Corps, now enter your more, I guess, more professional life. And so where did you start off from there once you finish Peace Corps?
And once I finished Peace Corps, I was confused because I was not
Hmm.
sure if I wanted to go back to landscape architecture, you know, like design, working in a firm, or if I wanted to go back to construction management, which is the
Hmm.
last thing I did before doing Peace Corps, or if I wanted to go into humanitarian work or development. It's two different branches
Hmm.
of work, you know.
Hmm.
So what I did was, you know, I went back home and I was like, okay, I feel coming out of Peace Corps, of course, I feel like one, I wanted to stay in Nepal because I loved it so much. Like at the beginning, I was kind of like, what the fuck am I doing here? But at the end of it, I really loved the place. I still love it.
Hmm.
And, you know, I knew that I wanted to stay or kind of stay there or go somewhere else and get a new experience doing other work. But I also felt a pull to kind of like make sure that I didn't want to go back to what I was doing before for, I don't know, for a few years, I don't, like 3 years or whatever. So like so what I did is I went back home and I went back into construction management, you know, building like mixed use developments, whatever, blah, 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 charter schools, blah, blah, blah. And then I was also doing consultancies for, uh, you know, landscape architecture, designs, and whatever. And after doing that for like a year, I was like, yeah, this is not what I want to do anymore. And then, at the same time, like Smithy, like I had my, at the time, girlfriend, now wife, and she basically ended up getting a job in Myanmar,
Hmm.
right? So when she got a job in Myanmar, I was like, she was actually working to come to join me in Miami. And I was like, actually, no, don't come to Miami, go to Myanmar. Because I'll also like, I'm also interested to continue to do humanitarian work,
Hmm.
or I wanted to try humanitarian work. I had, with Peace Corps, you're more like on the development end of things.
Hmm.
So I wanted to like, while in Nepal, while I was finishing Nepal, like it was around 2012 or so, 2014 when I finished. So around that time, it was like the time that Myanmar was like opening up from, there was the authoritarian regime changing to democracy. It was the first time that international companies were being able to go in, that
Hmm.
NGOs and humanitarian work was like be, becoming
Needed,
normal
basically.
there. Like,
Hmm.
so, like, I don't know, I had been following it for a time. So when she got a job there, I was like, okay, go, you know, and I'll join you. And I was actually also burnt out from working in Miami because I kind of overdid it. I was doing my regular job with construction management, but also doing consultancy. So I ended up working like a lot of hours, like 9 to 5 plus plus. So I was working like till like 1 in the morning every day and all that.
Hmm.
So I kind of like overdid it and burned myself out. So when she got that opportunity, I was like, take it. I need a break. I'll come join you and then I'll find something. And then, that's it. It's kind of how I worked out because then, or how things worked out because then I ended up joining her in Myanmar. And initially I was thinking like, I'm gonna take 6 months, just kind of center myself and get over the burnout so then I can like look into getting a humanitarian job. And I was kind of like the first month that I was there, I was kind of like bullshitting and you know drinking whiskey and drawing in the middle of the day, working out,
Hmm.
going to like I was learning like Burmese boxing and whatever, and slightly kind of like putting feelers out there. And then I ended up getting a job to do a project for cyclone response in Rakhine, and that's how kind
Hmm.
of it was just by, I wouldn't say luck, it was kind of like situation. Like I kind of like put myself in a situation where luck happened in a way. I don't know if that makes sense.
Right. And I guess like,
But
like
most people don't
how,
get into humanitarian work that way though. That
right,
it's
right,
it
right.
My pathway is a different way.
Okay. But like in terms of like, since you had 6 months of sitting around, right? Like how were you able to sustain yourself for 6 months? Because I feel like,
But
if you were in
but
the
in
same
the end,
situation in the US, you probably won't be able to sustain yourself like that. So how were you able to sustain yourself, um, not having a job yet, and like how were you able to survive that? Like let us know how you were able to do that.
so I think that's a couple of things. I think like, well, first of all, like it wasn't 6 months that I didn't like. I ended up getting a job within a month
Hmm.
because things just worked out that way. So I wasn't
Okay.
able to take 6 months like I was initially planning.
Okay.
But in terms of like sustaining myself, I don't know. It's kind of like planning that I do for myself because you know I think this is something that people don't do in the US because a lot of people are reliant on their job to on a month to month basis to pay their bills or whatever,
Hmm.
or also luxury, like like I'm lucky that I've had my family where I can stay with them, and even if my job was not paying enough, I could still save money to put myself in a situation where if worse came to worse, I still could sustain myself for a year because I've saved that much money and put aside. That's a luxury. Not everybody can do that.
Right.
And that's just like the way that I plan, that I always keep like kind of like a contingency of like, if shit hits the fan, I can sustain myself for a year, 2 years, I'll be okay. But not everybody in the US has that luxury to do that, or they're not thinking like that and they're overstretching themselves to have that fancy car or have like that super apartment or house that they want, rather than thinking like, okay, what I actually need to live a good life is this, but then I can also like, I should also, if a hurricane hits Miami, I lose all my shit. What do I have? How am I going to deal with that? People don't think that way. But I don't know, for me, it's something that I've always thought of, because it's not because I'm scared that something is going to happen and like, okay, like a comet is going to hit Earth and whatever. Like, it's not that kind of thing. It's more like I value my freedom and I don't want to be working to live to pay those loans, or to, like working to survive. Like, I always want to have like flexibility, and freedom is something that I really value. So I've always worked to keep that as much as I can, actually.
Right.
It's
And I
kind of
think
like,
that's a great mindset to have. And I think more people in this country, in the US, should have that as well too. And I think it would solve a lot of issues with life here. And in terms of like how you got to your cyclone recovery job, like how did you find it? Like was it kind of postings, or you looked online? Like what's the steps in finding those type of jobs, like once you're in that area?
I think it's like with everything, it's like situation, a little bit of luck, and talking to people. Like I just kind of like, I got to Myanmar, got to know people, started talking to people that I met, put applications out, and through that, like I met this French guy that was the country director for an INGO, and basically we got to talking, and like, it was like cyclone response for Cyclone Komen, which was a big cyclone that caused a lot of displacement and flooding in Myanmar, in Rakhine State. And basically, I got to talking to the guy, and I was honest, and I told him, look, I have Peace Corps experience. I don't have humanitarian emergency response experience, but I have these skills. I have worked in construction management. I have a background in landscape architecture. I can, I can do, some of the same things that engineers are designing. I can also do the same thing, and I can cost things out. And I explained to him that I could, basically, I showed him that I could be a part of a WASH project, which is like water sanitation project, where basically I went into villages that were impacted by the cyclone, and I rehabilitated water and sanitation infrastructure, which is similar to the work that I was doing in construction management or landscape architecture design. So with that, I kind of like built a connection, and the guy understood how I could help. Also, like a big leverage that I had was that I was in country already. But this is not the traditional way that people get into it. More, I think my Peace Corps experience for sure had an influence, because like, when you're going into humanitarian or development work, Peace Corps is a plus. But most people study like international studies, or and they do Peace Corps and they get an internship or whatever, and then that's how they get into it. For me, it was Peace Corps. Then I did, earthquake response project in Nepal.
Mm-hmm.
That it was not like I was working for an agency. It was more like, I did fundraising and project management stuff from Miami because I was not in Nepal at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I did some earthquake response, and then like I used those things to kind of build a connection, and it led to me landing a job. And initially the job was like 3 months, but like it was 3 months, cyclone response, Rakhine State, Myanmar. But I ended up staying there 3 years. So it became
Right.
something, it was something different.
Right. And being in Myanmar, like you probably notice all things that are happening in Myanmar. So like tell us your experience in Myanmar. Like what did people need in Myanmar? What was the things that they needed from you guys?
So Myanmar's an interesting country because, now it's much different with, of course, there's the coup, and things have changed a bit for the worse.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an interesting country in the sense that, okay, from the humanitarian perspective, it's an interesting country. Like, it's a country that at the time that I was there was changing from military dictatorship to democracy, or what was perceived as democracy, to,
Mm-hmm.
to a more civilian-led government. In that democracy, there was the transition from the military to civilian, and then things were opening up to the world on the facade. But in actuality, the military was still in control of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And the military kind of has like, it's a lot of, I hate to say it, and maybe this is too political for some people, but in a way, you can see a lot of what Trump did in the US, where it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like, let's divide people, get them to fight with each other so I can push my agenda and take more power.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of how the military operates in Myanmar, where they are like splitting ethnic groups, getting them to fight against each other. They're also having conflict in, I worked and I specialized in Rakhine State, but there's also Kachin, Shan, and other regions in Myanmar that are fighting against the government in Myanmar, as well as within themselves
Mm-hmm.
for power and ideals.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very comparable to where things have gone, not only in the US, but I think worldwide, with more nationalist politics, that
Mm-hmm.
that that's going on. And because the military has this kind of like divide and conquer approach, people are focused on fighting with each other while the military is eating well. They're making money from the gas, that
Mm-hmm.
the petrol, that the resources that are available in Myanmar. They're controlling the jade mines and selling to China, and they're
Mm-hmm.
taking all this money, and people, like local people, are not benefiting
Mm-hmm.
from their local resources, or the government is not giving back to them. Like in Myanmar, where I was in Rakhine, like you go out of Sittwe, where I was based, and you go out on a boat for an hour or two, and you get to villages that it's like traveling back in time. No electricity, no schools, no access to like social services of any kind. They're
Mm-hmm.
just living on like fishing and rice. Like it's kind of crazy. Like they have a lot of needs. They have a lot of needs in terms of development, like helping them to develop social services, and access to social economic services. But also there needs to be resolution to all the conflicts that militias, military ideals are causing.
Mm-hmm. And do you foresee any of these things fixing themselves, or you think by themselves, or do you think it's going to take outside pressure from the world in order for this to change, I guess? Or what do you think about that?
And that's a tough question to answer, because I think definitely, like, and I think this is something that, in my opinion, and this is my opinion, I know people different thoughts on this, but the US being lead in the world, I think has a lot of influence on other countries, one by example in terms of the way that we do things, and also with influence because of economy, like, because the US is a global economy that has leverage over the other countries. And I think it's important because it's not only the US, but also like European countries, Germany, etc., that can put diplomatic pressure to facilitate a solution. I don't think military intervention is something that would fix things. I think now, being in Iraq, for example, I can tell you it's something that doesn't work. But I think kind of being a player, facilitating conversations is something that can go a long way, because at the end of the day, like, if you're not able to facilitate conversations and, for people to see eye to eye and work on common ground, then solutions won't happen. And I think that's, for Myanmar, it's something that needs to happen, because it's more like military wants one thing, then you go talk about Rakhine State, where people are Rakhine nationalists. They want Rakhine to be its own country. They don't want to accept Muslims, and there's people that think like that, but still within that, there's a lot of things that people have in common. And, it's about reaching that common ground, even though people may have different ideals. Different ideals are good. They can also be bad, but, I think working from that common ground is the most important thing. I don't know if I answered your question, but I was a little bit all over.
No, I think that answers it, I think, to satisfaction. I think that's what, in general, people should do. Just try to look for that common ground. And not try to find the differences. Just look for the common ground. And I think that's very important.
But I think, but also, like, within finding common ground is also like, like I said, Myanmar, a lot of conflict. Like I saw a lot of. Oh, damn it! The power went out again.
No. Life
no, it's still going. So,
no, yeah. You're still good. You're still good.
Yeah. So now the generator's in. So yeah, it's not only about common ground, but also like being tolerant to differences. Like, even though people could be like extremely different than you, it's also being open to that, like, and accepting of that, and you yourself searching for that common ground, rather than like living in your bubble. Because it's easy nowadays, I find, and I see that not only with, like, you see that with social media, where you're like in this bubble of common ground, where you obviously are drawn to the same ideas that you think, because social media is doing that and kind of guiding you in that way. But also, like, for example, in humanitarian work, we're also in a bubble of commonness, because we have like a common understanding of the world. But outside of that, you have to be understanding that people have very different perspective on things, and you kind of have to respect that. And it's okay to be different. It's okay to think completely different, but in the end, like, we all want similar things. So I think it's common ground and being tolerant, like, different ideas are they can be a bad thing, but it's also a very powerful thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Tolerant of different ideas, different cultures. I think that's a very powerful thing. I think it's something that in the last years you can see in the US with, like what's happening in, like, for example, like the Asian community, the Black community, but you can see it all over the world that for whatever reason, things have regressed to more like nationalist, I identify with this group, everybody else is out kind of ideals.
Yeah, yeah. And it's definitely happening all around the world. Yeah, it's pretty sad. But now I want to discuss like your perspective on like what are the cons in the humanitarian work? Because obviously like me and you are friends, but you live in Iraq and I live in Miami. Like what kind of like cons is to your personal life for being a humanitarian?
So that's the thing. Like if you, I think like for me it's a tough thing actually, because when I go home or I meet my family, like they think like I'm in this vacation, like I'm just on vacation, 365 days, just chilling, and I'm actually like humanitarian work is tough, and there's a lot of pros, there's a lot of cons. Like it's nice in a sense because you get to experience all these different countries, different cultures. You get to help people that really need help, like with like extreme help, like life saving, like if I don't help these people, they will die kind of situation. And that's rewarding. It's also personally a pro in the sense that, working in this tough environment, of course, you get the opportunity and access to travel to a lot of places. And, like, for example, like the last 2 weeks or the last week, I was in Greece, right? And I was kite surfing and like I have access to these things. But all of that also comes at a cost, like you are also giving up time with you as my friend, or time with my family. My parents are getting older and I'm not there. People get married and you cannot go to their wedding. Your friends have kids, you can't spend time with their kids and build a relationship. Is you give up a lot actually, but you also get other things in return. It's kind of something you have to weigh or be conscious of, like what you're giving up. I don't know. There's pros, there's cons. You give up a lot to do this kind of work, and it's not all.
It's not fun and games, basically, right?
It's not all like what people think, that I go home and it's like, oh yeah, I went to Greece, it was fantastic. Oh my God, you've been in Iraq. Oh, you went hiking, so cool. It's this being in this kind of situation takes a toll on your personal relationships. Like it's difficult to keep a marriage, for example. Like currently, like I don't know, things are not so good with my wife, for example. Like things are going really bad actually because of living in this kind of lifestyle. Or like I don't know, it's you give up a lot. You give up a lot.
Right. Yeah. And I definitely see that because like when you first started, going overseas for work, like I personally was like, oh man, I'm not gonna be able to see you ever again. And I felt I was a little bit like, selfish in a way. Like I want you to stay here because I wanted to be with you, but I know that you were doing your own thing and trying, enrich your life as well too. So yeah, I think that's a very, difficult thing to balance, and it seems like it's a very common thing in your field in terms of people who are in that kind of field are, have to balance this somehow, and somehow usually it's hard, right?
Yeah, and it's rewarding in a way because like you have a positive effect on people that really need help. But also within that, for example, like I've done, it also affects you over time, seeing like these really difficult situations where people are reliant on humanitarian support,
Mhm.
So like I've been in situations, for example, that we're doing cash programming to, support people, I don't know, in Myanmar after the cyclone, or in Iraq post-war
Mhm. Mhm.
situation, that, for example, maybe we're doing like cash programming and we're giving
Mhm.
cash to the most vulnerable people so that they can like have a little bit of money, so that they're not, for example, having to sell their daughters to slavery or to be
Mhm.
sex workers and
Mhm.
shit like that,
Mhm.
But it's also has a, it also has like a, it also is tough on me personally,
Mhm.
because,
Mhm.
like at the end of the day, like it doesn't matter how good you plan or how good your program is, it's, people get left out because you don't have enough resources for everyone. So at the end of the day,
Mhm.
like people are coming, like I've had projects that I've done that we're helping people, and then still people are coming with their babies, and you see they give, like one time I remember, like I was doing a program, and we're doing cash programming, and this woman came up to me with her child, and her child was disabled, and she was like, look, my child is disabled, I need help, why are you not giving me this help? And she just, she just didn't, she wasn't, didn't fit the criteria of the program, and we just couldn't extend support to her because we just didn't have resources for everyone, and
Mhm.
we were just we were really targeting the most vulnerable. But that's not to say that she didn't need help, she definitely needed some help, but we just, I couldn't do it. And what I'm trying to say is like, okay, with humanitarian work, there's the beauty of it. Yeah, you work in this, you get exposure to different cultures, that's beautiful. You get to see a lot of countries, that's cool. But yeah, like I'm saying, you compromise on personal relationships. You also like seeing these things over time also takes a toll on you. Like it's kind
Mhm.
of, it affects you. It affects you in a negative way, because at home, you know, of course, there's people that are in equal need,
Mhm.
but in like I'm saying, people live in bubbles, right? Like in Miami Lakes, you don't see that. You don't see
Mhm.
that people in Overtown are suffering and maybe they don't have food to eat sometimes. Like it's, I don't know, seeing the more extreme, it really takes a toll on you over time, and
Right.
you give up a lot.
Mhm. And definitely, thank you for taking that kind of like sacrifice in order to enrich the world. But now that you've learned so much from around the world, what do you think would help here in America as well? Like what you have learned, like that you think you could apply. Maybe it'll be like a good idea for America to try. Maybe if you know of anything that would help here that you learned while there that no one else has maybe thought about, or for example, maybe UBI or something. I don't know, whatever.
I don't know how to answer that, but
Uh-huh.
like for example, with COVID, I think there's a lot of, you know, being back home during COVID was really unique for me, because one, it showed me a lot of the value of the work that I do as a humanitarian worker, because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the response that, for example, the U.S. government is doing for vaccines, or the measures that they took to kind of control COVID, these are things or being in lockdown situations, these are things that are normal to me because I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
humanitarian work. So like being in a lockdown, like fuck, sometimes that's the situation that I'm in. Like, like in you know in Iraq, for example, like in Baghdad,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not able to go anywhere because there's ISIS, Iranian militias. Like I can't go around. In Erbil, it's more free, but there's certain areas that also I can't go to because it's higher risk to be in a conflict. And like what I'm saying is like being in a lockdown situation is normal to me in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, in the US, like people, you know, kind of took for granted their freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And then like I think it goes back to what we were saying to before about being tolerant, finding common ground, you know? Because one of the things that I saw a lot with COVID is that people at the beginning were tolerant of the situation. They were kind of
Mm-hmm.
supportive, but then at the end they started thinking of themselves and they forgot that it was not about you. It was
Mm-hmm.
about what you would do to other people and how
Mm-hmm.
you could potentially like be asymptomatic and get your friend sick and your friend can
Mm-hmm.
possibly die, you know? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so I think like, I don't know, your question is hard to answer because there's not one specific thing that I can take from my experience to translate to the US. But
Mm-hmm.
with COVID, I think being tolerant and being more conscious of like how you affect other people is something that people should think about. I think
Right.
like it's not about you all the time. It's about, you know, there's in the US there's a lot of value on individuality, which is good. But there
Mm-hmm.
should also be like communal thinking to some
Mm-hmm.
extent and thinking of
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, how are we living together as a community? What can we, how do we support each other? What effect do I have on other people? And I think
Mm-hmm.
it, you know, in Miami, for sure, it's more like the culture is me and fuck you. Like that's just the way it
Right.
is.
Right. And I definitely see that. But now, like we're trying to, find some conclusion to this, right? So I want you to tell me how, like, your advice to other people who maybe want to get into your line of work. Like, what should they be aware of? How should they start? Like from the start, how should they begin trying to do your line of work?
I think I think with any work, I don't think, you know, when we go into, first of all, like I'll definitely you have to get some kind of like bachelor's, higher level degree, master's, whatever, because it makes a difference. Otherwise, like it would be it's almost impossible to get into this line of work.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that you have to study a specific thing. And I think that's with anything actually. Like it now that in my 35s,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like it's something
Mm-hmm.
that I can understand. Like, you know, when you graduate high school and you go into college, there's all this pressure. Like you need to be an engineer, you need to be a lawyer, you need to become a doctor. You know, there's like this pressures to do like certain careers and study certain things.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, if you study what you're interested, you find your way and you can do pretty much anything, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
can get into almost any field if you have the right attitude and you you know are able to kind of make connections with people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for sure, like if you're trying to get into humanitarian work, get a degree and then
Mm-hmm.
try to get some relevant experience through an internship or apprenticeship of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
And then like, you know, build relationships with people because then through those relationships, you know, you can push yourself forward. And you know,
Mm-hmm.
once people understand what you bring to the table and who you are, then things kind of come together. I think that's something that's undervalued that and I think, you know, in some countries you see it more than others. Like for example, Latin America, you don't get a job unless your mom and dad know some so and so.
Mm-hmm.
The US is different. You get a job through an application process or whatever, but relationships do have an influence. Your
Right.
personality and how you connect with people have an influence on the job that you can get, you know? And also for you, like as a person, you need to work for a company and for people that you want to work with. You don't want to work with people that you hate, right? So like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, like I think, you know, having an education building your skills over time through internships and getting experience, whatever way that is. It could be Peace Corps, could be, you know, volunteering
Hmm.
organic farm in Costa Rica or doing whatever. And
Hmm.
then using that to leverage building relationships. I think that's the way to go about it.
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, you're right. I think forming connections with people is probably the best way of getting whatever job you need or want, right? It's the same with me or anybody else. Like for me, that's how I got my jobs. I talk to people, I make them, understand who I am, and you just form that relationship because at the end of the day, you're not a robot, you're a person, right? So you're trying to do that kind of connection. And I think that's what matters in the world, that our friendships, our relationships with other people. And I think that's what the humanitarian is there for. It's called, there's a human in that word. And I think that's very important to not forget that human is part of that word, part of that job experience. And you have to be human.
Yeah.
Humanize yourself to get that job, Right. So any final words for yourself? Any final thoughts?
I think, I mean, yeah, if people watching this are interested in humanitarian work and they want to reach out, I'm happy to talk about it. I think it's more common for people from Europe to do this
Mm-hmm.
kind of work, but
Mm-hmm.
there's really very little people from the US, very little, Latin people, Asian people
Mm-hmm.
doing this kind of work. So I think it would be good for more people to get into this field. But
Mm-hmm.
like when I go home, I've never met any other like person in my line of work. I know
Mm-hmm.
people in my line of work only because of the network that I've built over time, but it's not very common. And I think
Right.
it's an undervalued field in the US. So I don't know. I encourage people
Yeah.
to look into it, and if they want more information, like I'm happy to to talk to anyone. So
Yeah.
reach out.
If you want to, I can maybe link your contact information down below into the details maybe. And if people want
Yeah,
to, if people want to reach out and ask for your help, I think that'll be
yeah,
pretty cool. All right.
yeah. I'm happy to help for sure.
All right, man. Well, I thank you for participating in this little story time, and I'm glad you were able to share your experience with us. And you know what? And I guess we'll catch you guys next time on our channel. See you guys.